There are now middle powers who are able to influence international politics. But apart from those middle powers, there is an inevitability. It is the rise of China and its ability and Beijing's willingness to engage with the outside world and affect what is happening outside its traditional spheres of influence. So quite clearly, the session title speaks for itself, China's importance especially to the global south. So let's just introduce our panelists. We have, moving from top to bottom, Dr. Eduardo Enrique Reina Garcia, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation for Honduras. Her Excellency Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, who's actually been spoken about as a possible successor to the current UN Secretary General. So that's very interesting to hear in the international media. We also have His Excellency President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. We have the President, His Excellency of Namibia, Angola Mbumba. And we have Dr. Henry Xiaoyu Wang, who is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, also former counselor to the China State Council. So we have to begin, obviously, with the Chinese perspective. Dr. Wang, people have been saying for years now that China is rising. Should we not just say China has arrived now? And what is its ambitions in terms of its position as now a superpower in a multipolar world?
Great. Thank you, Adam, for moderating, and also very pleased to accompany by so many distinguished, honorable guests. I think that absolutely, we are coming to the Doha Forum, which is a great event, and I think China, in the last 46 years since it opened up, has really become one of the very remarkable success of the developing countries. Actually, achieved the second largest economy status in the world, and also has been really participating actively in the global South activities, and also to sustain the current global order. We know, for example, now the global order of Bretton Woods system has been 80 years since its beginning, but this system needs to be upgraded, needs to be enhanced and improved and enlarged. I think China's role in the rising global south, particularly redefining the future of a global order, as we've been talking in this panel, is really there are several roles China can play. First is economic roles. I think that's probably the key role that China can play. For example, China is the major trading partner for 140 some countries. And also, very important, China offers a huge market, and also, for example, President Xi just recently announced that China is going to lift the tariff for 30-some least developing countries for the goods to come to China. So that's really remarkable, while others, still raise the tariff and high fence, and the Chinese lower its fence and lower its market entry point. So this is very good. And also, on top of that, China has launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which has 150 countries, most of them are developing countries, global south countries. China has launched the AIIB to do the infrastructure for the developing countries, and also China joined the RCEP, the largest free trade agreement in the world. And of course, on top of that, China is working with African, Latin American, Gulf countries, Central Asia, and of course also ASEAN. So you can see all those things happening. Infrastructure, tackling, build roads, bridges, and speed railways, and all the rest. And the ports, recently, President Xi was attending the APEC summit. We see that a brand new port has been built up in Peru for facilitating Latin American and Central American as well. So I think that's number one. Number two, I'd say that China also has a great, even though China has in many ways has lowered its tariff and has fulfilled its obligations, but China still treats itself as a developing country because of the political identity. China wants to work for Global South, wants to really help in Global South. And for example, you can see China become a driving force in the BRICS countries, where BRICS country has doubled last year, and then it has another 30 countries lined up to join that. So you can see that is really, China is playing some mediating role, for example, between Saudis and Iranians, and China has gathered 14 Palestinian fractions to Beijing to also facilitate those peace talks. And finally, I would say, China also has some technological roles to play for the Global South and for the world, for example, on the climate change, China is the leading power of the green transition, and of course also China is the on the telecommunication and also solar panels, particularly tackling climate change. I think, for example, one of the China solar company that work in Africa produce a small solar panel for 50 million African families, so they can charge the battery on the iPhone and watch television in the evening. So those things are really good. So finally, I think China is not alone. China is actually would like to work with other countries, with EU, with US, sustain the UN and work with UN principles. So in many ways, I think China is ready to work with the world, and particularly to show a new driving force behind the global South countries. So that would be my comment.
Dr. Wang, you've done all my work for me. You have literally covered everything that we need to discuss here. Time is tight. The issue of how China can help the economic development of the global South is quite apparent, but we also have to discuss the governance of the world order in this multipolar world that we now inhabit. President Kagame, what do you feel about China's ability to help the economic development of Africa? I understand that obviously Africa is so many countries and you can't represent the entire continent, but what we have seen is an increasing interest for African countries to do deals with Beijing. What is Africa getting out of it?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me say China rising is a good thing, and that depends on its rising maybe with others. So how it conducts the business is very important, how it relates, how it cooperates with other countries, and most especially the African countries, as you raised. So it's a good thing. And there is a history between China and Africa for many years that goes back many decades. When Africa was, most of the countries on the continent were getting independence, they had a lot of support from China at the time. Now the cooperation is presents more value in terms of trade, investment, and to the point, I specifically give you an example. When there was a removal of tariffs recently, we have seen for Rwanda, the value of trade we had with China rose from, say, 35 million US dollars to a very tiny amount to 150 million. So that speaks for the benefits of such measures that have been taken. I also imagine for other countries that even have bigger economies than Rwanda on the continent have benefited much more. So that's a very good thing. And this relationship doesn't come with a lot of strings attached like we have had with many other parts of the world. We get more in terms of lectures and not so much in terms of value as I have stated with China. So for China, for Africa, the relationship is beneficial, and we've seen it in numbers from one country to another. And recently, the meeting we had, FOCAC in Beijing recently, we saw that demonstrated in terms of attendance and discussions and contracts signed, and also the growing value presented by Belt and Road Initiative that has been put in place by China. In Rwanda specifically, we have projects in, for example, hundreds of millions of projects in terms of value in hydro. We have hydropower station being built. We have built a large hospital that is a university hospital. It does research with China, with the support of China. We see so many things practical to the development of our countries, and specifically I can give example of Rwanda in that sense, but I know more is happening across the continent. There has been also this prejudice about China. You talk about debt, countries falling in. I think that should not be blamed on China, much as it could take the blame for part of the blame for that. But Africans also, we need to do better in engagement with our partners, like in this case with China. We could always take loans that we know we are going to deploy to projects that are actually going to give us good returns both ways. So that can, but I have seen China is making improvement in terms of approach to how they engage Africa, especially on these projects. They target projects, not the kind of very big projects that consume a lot of money, but in the end you don't, or in the process, it is not well implemented and cause problems. So I think, and that's where the governance part comes in. The governance is about getting things right properly, targeting the right people, the right places, and getting the returns you want from the beginning.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. President Mbumba, how much China has invested heavily in your country as well? Particularly, I was looking at the mining sector and how important that is to your country. But how much those traditional powers, the colonial powers of Europe that used to be engaged in Africa and also in the United States and its attitude towards the African continent, how much are they to blame, actually, for ignoring Africa and therefore making it easier for China to build these relationships on your continent?
Thank you very much for rephrasing your questions. The title has been that the role of rising global south, redefining the future of world order. Let me join President Kagame for representing the position of the African continent very well in terms of our relationship to China. In the first place, if China is rising, China is a star in itself. It has the population, it has the history, and it has a relationship in terms of how it started contacting to its contact to Africa. It did not start with coming with an army. Slowly, we start engaging one another, and especially in the liberation of Africa, they contributed. While some people who came to colonize us, they were refusing to leave. That is very, very, very clear. In terms of modern cooperation, they are the #1 miner of uranium in Namibia. We have a lot of uranium in Namibia. Other countries are involved too, but even the one mine which used to belong to a British company, they sold it to the Chinese. They themselves sold it to the Chinese. We did not tell them to sell it, but it's a market forces, okay? So in that way, we have certain things we are doing with the Chinese in terms of mining, in terms of trade. They have opened up their trade. We can market our beef to them as much as we want. Mutton, the same. Grapes, the same. Dates, the same. And many other things. So in that way, it is really on the basis of cooperating with one another, not forcing anybody. And also, if the Western countries want to compete, the competition is open. It's not that China is doing this for the wrong reasons. China is opening up the business, and their companies also, in terms of their companies, which European, British company, or German company, or Italian company is going right now to come and build a road in Africa. They are doing other things. They are highly sophisticated items. But Chinese have companies that can do the dirty work, if you can put it that way, cleaning up things, building roads, opening mines, and so on. So in terms of us, ours is based on political understanding of one another, cultural cooperation in promoting understanding of one another, exchanging of academic people who want to teach and who want to train, and also sending our students all over the world, which we want and which we need. We are developing green hydrogen in Namibia, basically together with European companies, especially the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and others. But the Chinese are also welcome to come and work with us. We are not blocking anybody. We are trading openly, and we have open relationship with each and every country. So in that way, we are developing our country too. And as President Kagame said, we Africans are learning how to do things for ourselves and with whom to do them, openly and on our own strength. And if it is our weakness, then we are to blame. And if we were sharp enough to match other people, then the benefit will come to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, let's move from Africa to the western part of the world and the relationship that China has with the Caribbean and Latin America. Prime Minister Motley, what does, you're so far away from China. You would have thought that geographically the Caribbean would fall under the US sphere of influence, but what does the rise of China and China's ability to help the Caribbean mean to your part of the world?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And let me say at the outset that we are all countries on the planet Earth, and therefore the distance ought not to matter. Our common humanity is what binds us together. And our relationship with China goes back almost half a century, long before many other countries opened up to diplomatic relations with China. So let me put that on the table first and foremost. Secondly, as a country, when we became independent 58 years ago, we made it clear that we had permanent interests and that we would be friends of all and satellites of none. And as small as we are, we've tried to maintain that as a core principle of our foreign policy relationship. China, like any other country, is one with whom we would want to have serious relationships. And over the course of almost a half century, we've been able to have economic cooperation, we've been able to have cultural cooperation, we've been able to have cooperation on the diplomatic front. But I want to go back to the Bandung Conference of 1955, because that is where the then Premier of China, Zhou Enlai, set out the precepts upon which China's foreign policy would be developed. I set out just now for you what ours was. And if you go back to the precepts of the Bandung Conference, which established clearly that colonialism in any form or any manifestation is unacceptable in a modern world, you then begin to understand what are the core principles that would cause our countries in the region, in the Caribbean region, and China to find a common platform. And the reality is that Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana took decisions in the 1970s with the opening up of Cuba relations and with the opening up of relations with China that reinforced that notion of self-determination and mutual respect with countries. And it is against that backdrop that the relationship has taken place. I'm amused when I see topics such as this, because really and truly there is an unconscious bias that has led to this topic. And the question is whether any country has the right to be able to assert that it wants to help redefine a global order in a multipolar world. And we clearly believe that you do. But the unconscious bias is to suggest that only Western civilization has that right, and we know better. If we are to be faithful to the principles of the Bandung Conference or of the United Nations International Declaration of Human Rights, and the manner in which we have set out to engage each other globally, then it is in all of our interests for every country to rise as far as possible and for every country to be able to offer cooperation on the basis of mutual respect. And therefore, I am amused, but simply say, like President Kagame, that those who would wish to disparage it should remember that negotiations take place on two sides, and that in those circumstances, that if there are examples where one side has gotten the better of the other, I can assure you that it is not unique to China. There are many examples where other countries have taken advantage of other people. So let us focus, however, on how we can make the world a better place. And it is no doubt that there are large countries with strong economic power, military power, and strong civilizations that can make the world a better place. But the big issue is, what are the values and what is the trajectory? And if we have a world that does not see small countries, does not feel or appreciate the role of small countries, then we have a problem. And therefore, our concern really is, and that's why I went back to the Bandung Conference, because the precepts that existed then, in 1955, ought to be the precepts more than ever. I want to make this one point. We are in the throes, in my view, of the dying of the current world order. And the new world order clearly is struggling to emerge. We are going to have to ask ourselves whether the only players will be sovereign countries, whether there is not a role for other players, particularly with respect to the preservation of global public goods, whether we don't need to be able to look for funding beyond country funding, particularly when countries have said that there is a dearth of capacity on their part for more public money to fight climate, to be able to fight against the pandemics of the world and prepare for the next pandemics, to be able to deal with the digital divide that is only increasing the inequity and the poverty that may exist out there. How are we going to make this world more effective? And even with the might of China or the might of the US, that is not going to be enough. And that is why I'm saying to us that what matters are the precepts and the values to which we hold firm. What matters to us is how do we preserve the global public commons? Because if a mosquito can cause someone to die, as small as it is, let us equate that now to countries. And if there are small countries that are exposed with no strong public health systems, they too can become the biggest risk to global stability if new diseases with the new pathogens that are developing because of the increased climate, because of the increased droughts, because of the increased rains, all of these things put all of us at risk. And I ask simply the question, why are we as countries behaving in a way as if we do not have a common existence and a common battle to fight that is in fact greater than what each of us on our own can mount, even China, even the US, as large as they are. The need for planetary cooperation and the need for us to see how best we can unite is really where we ought to be going, rather than worrying about who has the edge over the other. Thank you.
Absolutely critical points you raised there, Prime Minister. The collective action that's needed and the issue of values. The question becomes whose values? Because if we come to Central America, Foreign Minister Garcia, what came to my mind as Prime Minister Motley was speaking was American military action to depose Morris Bishop in Grenada. But the Chinese don't seem to have that kind of judgment that they place upon others, to demand that those others have the same thoughts as they do, as the Americans. So what is China's relationship like with Central America, considering, again, what we've seen of those traditional northern global powers disregarding Africa and the way America has treated Central America over the past, you tell me how long. Oh, there's so many examples of American abuses in Central America.
Thank you, Adam, and it's great to share this panel with so distinguished head of state and government. Well, I think Honduras, for us, we arrived a little late in this relation with China in comparison with all other countries. We just have 1 year, 9 months of relation with China. In fact, we had a relation with Taiwan. And our president took the right decision, a pragmatic decision on the reality. The role of China in global order is there. China is the second or third trade partner for all Latin America, almost all Latin America. And even for Honduras, when we still have a relation with Taiwan, China became the third relation in trade partner. So really we have just to adjust of this reality. And in fact, I think it's not also the rising role of China in the global order, but also how the global south is changing. And as of all the mention of the presidents and the prime minister before of me, I think China is not only changing, we are also changing. And as Prime Minister Motis said, really is the respect of this self-determination, this respect of not intervention in our affairs. Is not only that we will not accept that someone impose what to do, but also someone trying to impose with whom we have relation or we have developed a relation. China, I think we have been constructing as Honduras a new relation in this short period of time. We are negotiating a free trade agreement. We already have China as an important market for products, and it's all right, I think. And as you mentioned, sometimes other powers are trying to, even though the world has changed to a new world order by itself, they're trying to impose practice of the old global order. There are still minds, not only in the US, but also in Europe, they're trying to live within the Cold War thinking, and they're trying to impose that to you. There are some mention of congressmen or senators in the US trying to say, don't go further with China. Don't go further with relation with other countries. Or for example, you have to support us in these issues related with the conflict in Russia or Ukraine. But I think we have been developing our sense of relations. And afterwards, sometimes this conflict between global powers and then leaving you alone there with the fight that is not yours. So we have to be very pragmatic. And I think China is developing a relation of respect, mutual benefits. And I think we are enjoying that relation, and we will move forward to develop this relation with China. And also I think there are many things that we may work together for the improvement of the realities of our own peoples, not only with China, but also within the global south. how we may work together, because sometimes for Central America, as you mentioned, historically, we have been so close to the US, but so far also from our neighborhood. We have been far from Latin America, we have been far from the Caribbean, and we need to work together, really, as Prime Minister showed. Really, we need to work together to face the realities and the crises of the world, like in climate change, like in conflicts, like the pandemic show us that if we are alone, we will not go together. And as His Highness said today in the opening of this forum, how is adaptation, innovation? And with that, we have to work. And one bit of example, when the US started a relation with China during the 70s, it was a new innovation. It was the right thing to do. They enjoy it, and also the European enjoy it, how China openness make them improve in their markets and their capabilities. But right now that China has get a higher level of competition with these four powers, now they're trying to impose you not to go with a relation with China. So it is a kind of double standards. So that's the relation I think we have to be very valiant to move forward as sovereign states and in respect with all the principles that rule the international law as sovereign state, no intervention, and also the respect of our own sovereignty.
Thank you very much indeed, Foreign Minister. Okay, we only have 10 minutes, so if you could just keep your answers a little bit more brief, and we'll hopefully try to get one or two questions from the audience. If you could put your hands up when I indicate, we'll see what happens, but time is running short. Dr. Wang, let's talk about BRICS, okay? And then Prime Minister Motley, let's talk about international governance and the UN Security Council and the changes that much of the world would like to see. The question about BRICS is a very specific one. The Minerals Security Partnership was set up about 18 months ago by mostly Western and global northern countries because they are specifically concerned that BRICS and BRICS Plus is going to eventually suck up most of the world's minerals and natural resources. So how does China reassure mostly the global north and the Western world that BRICS will not endanger them, but will benefit everybody?
Well, thank you, Anna. And absolutely, the BRICS actually, the success of BRICS largely actually depends on its economic cooperation. So I think this is a beauty of the BRICS is it does not have judged by the ideological values or camps comes from. We have Turkey. I had a foreign minister of Turkey, Faydan, come to my office saying that Turkey would like to be part of the BRICS because it's a NATO country also. So you see, it's open, inclusive, and it's really equal to all the partners. So I don't think that BRICS is going to be an ideological camp or security alliance or of any other nature. It's really purely economic, really development circles, I would say. It's really stimulating all the countries to develop. So I don't think that's going to exclude global northern countries. BRICS welcome to do trade with global northern countries, and of course I'm sure they can do. It's probably the opposite now. We got the threat from President-elect Trump saying, okay, if you guys want to have a little different experiment about the payment system, I'm going to levy 100% tariff. So that's, you see how the difference. So I think the BRICS are open, really wants to do more. And economic magnetic is really the beauty of the BRICS because it's excluding the where you come from, how low is how high you are. You can have a GDP of UAE of 50,000. You can have Ethiopia about 1,000. Doesn't matter. We are open for everybody. So I think that's the beauty. I think the world now is into multipolar world, and BRICS representing 80% of global south, and that really going to have a collective voice now for how to reform the global order, how to be more inclusive, open, and also welcoming. So I think that kind of attitude is needed in a more geopolitical driven world, in a more dynamic decoupling, de-risk, the rivalry kind of a culture. This is really open for unity, for cooperation, for economic development, for the global really peace and prosperity.
Okay, and thank you for keeping it brief. Prime Minister Motley, let's talk specifically about the UN Security Council, the country where I now live, in Turkey. Famously, President Erdogan was there at the UN General Assembly holding up his hand, the 5 fingers, saying the world is bigger than 5. Bearing in mind, of course, China has the veto power on the Security Council. Would you have any confidence that Beijing would be willing to relinquish some of its power in the UN Security Council to provide for a more broad-based organization, this main peacekeeping forum for the world, which seems to be failing?
I'm not sure that you're asking me the right question. I think that the issue is, will all 5 P5 countries...
But they're not going to, are they? We know they won't.
And therefore, if they're not going to, then we will reap what we sow. I made the point earlier that we are seeing the end of the current world order and the birth pangs of a new world order. The United Nations system was formed when most of the countries of the world were not sovereign entities. And whether we like it or not, it cannot reflect a true representation of the world's current realities. If we want to hold on to the past, then we better get eyes in the back of our head rather than in the front of our head, because we are seeing the dying of the current world order. The bottom line is, BRICS is an expression economically of the fact that 80% of the global south wants to have a voice of economic self-determination with respect to their futures. Similarly, if we don't reflect that kind of inclusive approach within the United Nations system, the United Nations will become less and less relevant to the realities of the people of this world.
Okay, any questions? We have 3 minutes left. Oh, lots. Okay. Gentleman at the back who's got a huge smile, stand up, please, if you don't mind, if we can get a microphone to him. Who are you, first of all, and what is your question?
Yeah, my name is John Miller-Beauvoir. I'm a political scientist and work in international development across 20 countries in the global south. I'm a Caribbean. I'm very glad to see Prime Minister Mia Motley. She is a global voice for reparations for countries.
If you could ask the question, we're running out of time.
Yeah,
okay?
I'll ask the question. I want to know how BRICS intends to work with the United Nations system, because there is imbalance in power. There's equilibrium within the United Nations. Is there a strategy for BRICS to kind of rectify the process where there is a tendency that the Western countries have leverages and influence over decision-making processes within the United Nations?
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll kind of reframe the question, because I'd like to hear from President Kagame, if you don't mind. In terms of your experience with China's ability to positively affect economic development, we've got the BRICS and BRICS Plus, we've got the Belt and Road Initiative. Do you see any potential pitfalls or dangers in terms of upsetting the global order that would produce a more negative effect to what we're seeing at the moment? Because at the moment, the only negatives seem to be kind of almost philosophical, warnings from the global north, rather than anything concrete that we've seen yet. So far, everything seems to have been progressing smoothly, but many people are saying, just wait. You will see that China will use all of this economic development for its own geopolitical purposes.
Well, to my understanding, for global order, the purpose is to have global stability, which we don't have. So when you see these formations coming up, like BRICS, they are coming up as a result of the fact that there is no global stability in the sense as we should know it, where the balance is just in favor of the North. So the global South, first of all, we also need to realize that there is a lot we can do that benefits us in the global South. So, but we need to come together, we need to work together. And after that, we can even gain more by having global South cooperate with the global North. But the global North has not been favorable to that kind of cooperation that creates that stability, that feels that everyone is gaining from that cooperation. And that led to the BRICS. BRICS, I'm sure, will, in a way, act as a check to the limitless use of power and means that the North has. So maybe it moves all of us to that stability we are looking for. Now, for China, I don't see why, in fact, the first question, with China growing, becoming more powerful, stronger, we don't see anything in history that suggests that China has misused its strength. I don't see it. Rather, we have been benefiting from the cooperation and the attitude to bring everybody to the table where everyone feels they are winning in the process. That is, to my understanding, what China presents. But we will not avoid geopolitical competition. That exists for a fact. And China being a part of that, I think presents a fair and a balanced way of competing. So the reduction of the misuse many times of the power held by the global North, I think is very important, and China has been contributing to that in many ways. And for the global South, those of us, small, big countries, we just need to work together and make sure that we are contributing our fair share to this global stability that the world wants.
Well, the theory is supposed to be that interdependency creates a safer and fairer and better world. Well, that's what you get when you bring a foreign minister, a prime minister, two presidents and a doctor together at the Doha Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Panelists, thank you very much.